The basket caught the wall with a crack that sent 3 sheets sliding onto the wet stone floor. Clara watched them fall. She did not move fast enough. She never did. Aldrich's footsteps were already fading down the corridor, unhurried, indifferent, as though he had not felt the impact at all. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps she was simply not solid enough to register as an obstacle. She knelt. The stone was cold through her skirt. Her knuckles, split from the morning's lye wash, left faint pink smears on the nearest sheet as she gathered the linen back into her arms, and she pressed the fabric hard against her apron until the bleeding stopped, or at least until it stopped mattering. Mrs. Greer's voice came from the far end of the corridor, sharp, efficient, the voice of a woman who had never once in her life needed to repeat herself. "Fenwick, those linens were due in the East Wing 10 minutes ago." Clara stood. She did not explain. There was nothing to explain that Mrs. Greer did not already know and had already decided was insufficient. She delivered the linens. The East Wing smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and something underneath both. Something older, like iron left in winter air. She moved close to the wall, the basket balanced against her hip, stepping aside twice for footmen who did not see her. The candles in the corridor sconces burned low and amber. She kept her eyes on the floor. She always kept her eyes on the floor. By the time she returned to the laundry, the other servants had gone. The copper tub sat cooling in the corner, the water gone gray and still. The folding iron had been left on the wrong hook again. She straightened it without thinking. Her hands shook. She had not noticed when it started. The trembling came on slowly these days, like water finding cracks in stone, patient, inevitable, accumulating in the small hours when there was no one left to perform steadiness for. She reached for the iron, and it slipped from her fingers, striking the stone floor with a sound that rang through the empty room like an accusation. She picked it up, set it down, reached for it again. It fell a second time. Clara stood very still. She looked at her hands, red to the wrist, the skin at her knuckles thin as paper, the cracks deep enough that the cold air found them before she did. 21 years of workhouse discipline and 7 years of service, and her hands still betrayed her in the quiet. She sat down on the floor, back against the copper tub, knees drawn up. She pressed her palms flat against the stone and held them there until the cold moved up through her skin and the trembling had something to push against. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of it at 9 years old, in a workhouse dormitory with 12 other girls, when she had understood that tears cost more than they returned. The lesson had held for 19 years. It would hold tonight. She reached for the nearest sheet, edge to edge. She folded it once, aligned the corners with the precision of long habit, smoothed the crease flat with the heel of her hand. Again. The linen was cool and clean and exact. She folded a second sheet, then a third. Her breathing steadied with each pass of her palm along the fabric, each sharp corner brought into alignment, each stack growing precise and ordered on the floor beside her. The trembling stopped. She sat in the silence of the laundry and listened to the house settle around her. The distant clank of pipes, the muffled movement of someone in the kitchen above, the December wind pressing against the high, narrow window. Wyndmere Hall breathed at night. She had learned its rhythms the way she had learned everything, by being too unimportant to be sent away from the room. Then she heard it. Not a fox. She knew fox sounds, the sharp bark, the eerie scream that raised the hair on the back of the neck. This was neither. It came from outside, from the direction of the kitchen garden, and it was somewhere between a whimper and a hiss, low and broken and wrong, in a way she could not name, a sound that did not belong in the December silence. She sat very still and listened. It came again. Clara set down the sheet she was holding. She stood. She did not think about it. Thinking would have stopped her, and something in the sound made stopping feel like a cruelty she was not willing to commit. She took her shawl from the hook by the door and stepped out into the snow. The kitchen garden was white and still. The cold hit her face like a flat palm. Her breath came out in clouds. The herb beds were frozen solid, their iron markers jutting from the drifts at odd angles, and the snow was still falling, fine and dry and relentless, filling every footprint almost as fast as she made it. Near the far bed, something moved. It was the size of a fox, but it was not a fox. She stopped walking. She stood in the snow and looked at it, and her mind did something strange. It went very quiet, the way it did in the moment before a heavy thing fell, when the body already knew what the mind had not yet processed. The creature was made of shadow, black smoke, curling and shifting, wrapped around a core of faint silver light that pulsed weakly in the dark. One side of its form flickered and dissolved, reforming with visible effort, as though the cold were eating it from the outside in. It was half buried in a drift. It had been there for some time. It turned its head and looked at her. Its eyes were amber, precisely, unmistakably amber, the color of old whiskey held up to candlelight, the color of something that had been burning for a very long time. Clara knelt in the snow. She did not think about what it was. She did not think about what it meant that a creature made of smoke and silver light was dying in the kitchen garden of Wyndmere Hall on a Tuesday in December. She thought about the sound it had made. She thought about the way it was watching her. Not with fear, but with something exhausted and patient. The look of a thing that has been waiting so long it has nearly forgotten what it was waiting for. She reached out and touched it. The smoke solidified under her fingers. Warm. Shockingly, impossibly warm, when everything else in the world was frozen. The silver light brightened where her hand made contact. The creature made a sound low in its chest, not a whimper this time, something quieter and more complicated than that. The pain came without warning. It erupted on her left wrist, a burning that went deep, past skin, past muscle, as though something were being written directly onto bone. She gasped and pulled her hand back. She looked at her wrist. Lines were appearing in her skin. Dark as ink, intricate as lace, forming a pattern she had never seen and could not name. A seal, she thought, though she did not know why she thought it, because she had never seen a seal that looked like this. The lines moved as they formed, branching and connecting, deliberate and precise, as though they had always been there beneath the surface of her skin and were only now deciding to be visible. The creature pressed closer. Its warmth moved against her ribs through the thin wool of her dress. The silver light at its core steadied. The seal on her wrist pulsed once, warm, deep, like a heartbeat that was not hers, then cold, sharp, and sudden, then warm again, and she realized with a lurch of something she could not name that it was synchronized with the creature's breathing. She clamped her right hand over her wrist. She stood. The snow was falling harder. She could barely see the kitchen door. She moved toward it, with the creature held against her chest, one arm cradling its smoke and warmth weight, the other hand pressed hard over the seal. The creature weighed almost nothing. It tucked itself against her with a kind of desperate precision, its silver light pulsing steadily now, its amber eyes half closed. She pushed through the servants' entrance. The corridor was dark and empty. She moved fast, close to the wall, the way she always moved, taking up as little space as possible, leaving no impression. The linen closet was at the end of the back passage, small, cold, a cot and a shelf and a hook for her shawl. It was hers in the way that nothing at Wyndmere Hall was truly hers, by default, by invisibility, by the fact that no one else had wanted it. She did not see Mrs. Greer. Mrs. Greer stood in the shadow of the pantry doorway, still as furniture, a ring of keys in one hand, and an expression on her face that Clara would not have recognized, even if she had looked. The housekeeper's eyes fixed on Clara's left wrist, on the seal still faintly visible through her fingers, still glowing with that low, steady pulse. Mrs. Greer's face went white. She pressed one hand against the doorframe. Her knuckles were pale against the wood. She watched Clara reach the linen closet door, watched her push it open, watched her disappear inside. She did not call out. Clara pulled the door shut behind her. The darkness was complete. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, back pressed against the wood, the creature curled in her lap. Her wrist burned. Her hands were shaking again, but differently now. Not from exhaustion, not from cold, from something she had no word for, something that felt like standing at the edge of a very high place and realizing the ground had already shifted beneath her feet. The creature's amber eyes opened. They caught no light. There was no light to catch. But they glowed anyway, steady and warm, fixed on her face with that same patient, exhausted recognition. The seal pulsed against her palm. Clara stared back at the creature. Her breath came in small, careful pulls. The darkness pressed close. Outside the door, Wyndmere Hall breathed and settled and kept its secrets, as it always had, as it always would. The seal pulsed again. She did not move. She did not look away. She sat in the dark with a creature made of shadow and silver light curled in her lap, her hand pressed over a mark that had written itself into her skin without her permission, and she understood, in the wordless, bone-deep way that the body understands things before the mind catches up, that her invisible life was over. The candle came first, a thin line of gold beneath the door, then the soft scrape of the latch, then light flooding the linen closet in a way that made Clara's eyes ache. She had not slept. She had not moved. The creature still lay across her lap, its smoke body slow and steady now, its silver core pulsing with a rhythm she had stopped trying to ignore. Mrs. Greer stood above her holding the candle. She did not speak immediately. She looked at Clara the way she looked at a stain she had not yet decided how to treat, with assessment, not judgment. The creature stirred. Its smoke flared outward, a brief dark hiss of warning, and the silver light sharpened to something almost white. Mrs. Greer did not flinch. She had the look of a woman who had decided, some years ago, that the world contained exactly as many alarming things as it contained, and that flinching had never once reduced that number. Her eyes moved to Clara's wrist. The seal was no longer glowing, but the lines were there, black as ink, fine as lace, branching across the pale skin in a pattern too deliberate to be anything but intentional. Clara had spent the dark hours staring at it. She had not been able to stop. "Do you know what that is, girl?" Clara shook her head. Mrs. Greer set the candle on the shelf above the cot. She lowered herself slowly, one knee at a time, until she was level with Clara on the floor. It was not a gesture Clara had ever seen from her. The housekeeper took Clara's wrist between two fingers and turned it toward the light. Her voice dropped. "That is the seal of the Vampire King." She did not whisper it. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, as though the words were tools and she was simply selecting the correct ones. "I have seen it once before, carved into the stone above the vault door in the east cellar. I asked Lord Vail about it 14 years ago when I first came to this house." Clara's throat was very dry. "What did he say?" "He said it was old. He said it was not my concern." Mrs. Greer released her wrist. "No living person bears it. Until you." Clara pulled her hand back and pressed it against her apron. The creature shifted in her lap, its amber eyes half open, watching Mrs. Greer with something that was not quite suspicion. "I found it in the snow," Clara said. "The creature. It was dying. I know what you found. I saw you bring it in." Mrs. Greer rose with the particular economy of a woman whose knees had opinions. "You cannot hide this, Fenwick. He will feel it before the day is out. He may already have." The cold that moved through Clara then had nothing to do with the temperature of the closet. "He will want to see it," she said. Not a question. Mrs. Greer picked up the candle. "He will want to see you. There is a difference, and I suggest you understand it before you stand in front of him." She paused at the door. "Come, now, before the other servants are up." The corridor that was dark and still. Clara followed close to the wall, the creature draped across her shoulder like a living stole, its warmth seeping through the wool of her dress. Her boots made no sound on the stone. Neither did Mrs. Greer's, which Clara had always found unsettling in a woman who was otherwise so thoroughly audible. The east wing was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. Warmth that did not belong to a house in December. Warmth that came from no visible source, as though the air itself had decided to behave differently in this part of the building. The candles in the sconces burned steadily, without draft. The carpet beneath her feet was deep and dark. Mrs. Greer stopped before a door and knocked once. "Enter." The study was full of firelight. Heavy curtains drawn against the winter morning. Books stacked on every surface with the particular disorder of a mind that knew exactly where everything was. A desk, a chair, and Lord Edmund Vale standing at the window with his back to them, one hand resting on the curtain's edge, perfectly still. He did not turn. "Show me." Clara did not move immediately. The creature pressed closer against her neck, its silver light steady. The fire crackled. The shadows at Lord Vale's feet were wrong. They pooled too thickly, gathered too deliberately, as though they were waiting for instruction. She stepped forward and extended her wrist. He turned. His amber eyes found the seal and held it. For 2 full seconds they shifted, deepening, darkening, the amber burning down to something that was unmistakably crimson. The temperature in the room dropped, not gradually, all at once, as though the warmth had simply decided to leave. Then he controlled it. The amber returned. The shadows at his feet stilled. He did not touch her wrist. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been searching for without admitting he was searching. "Where did you find the familiar?" "In the snow." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Behind the kitchen garden. It was wounded, half dissolved." He looked at the creature then. Something moved across his face that she could not name. Not warmth, not grief, but something older than either. The creature met his gaze without flinching. Its amber eyes were the precise color of his. "That creature has been searching for 200 years, he said. His voice was quiet, not gentle, not threatening. Something else entirely. Something that Mrs. Greer, standing 3 feet behind Clara, had never heard from him in 14 years of service. "It found you." Clara's hand tightened around her wrist. "I am a laundress." He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. "You were." He turned back to the window. The dismissal was not unkind. It was simply complete. "The seal you carry is older than I am." He spoke to the curtain, or to the winter light pressing through it. "It belonged to the Hallowmere line, a vampire house that was destroyed before I became Vampire King. No one has borne it since. No one was supposed to." The word vampire settled into the room like a stone into still water. "The house was destroyed," Clara said carefully. "Then how?" "That is the question." He did not turn. "Mrs. Greer will see to your arrangements. You will not return to the laundry." It was not a request. It was not cruel. It was simply the way things were now, in this new arrangement that had happened to her without her consent. Mrs. Greer's hand found her elbow and steered her toward the door. The room Mrs. Greer brought her to was in the east wing, 3 doors from the study, and it was larger than the linen closet by a factor that made Clara stand in the doorway for a long moment before she could make herself go in. A bed with an actual headboard, a washstand with a basin and a pitcher of steaming water, a small table with a covered tray. The curtains were drawn, but the fireplace was lit, and the light it threw was amber and steady. Mrs. Greer set down the bundle of clothes she had been carrying. Clean things, plain but whole, without the particular gray exhaustion of workhouse issue fabric. "Wash, eat, rest if you can." Clara sat on the edge of the bed. She did not touch the tray. The creature settled onto the pillow beside her with the proprietary confidence of something that had decided this was now its place. Its amber eyes half closed, its smoke body curled into a shape that was almost, but not quite, the shape of a sleeping fox. Her hands were shaking again. She reached for the towel on the washstand. Edge to edge. She folded it once, aligned the corners, smoothed the crease flat with the heel of her hand. The linen was clean and white and exact. She folded it again. Her breathing steadied with each pass. Mrs. Greer watched from the doorway. She did not comment on the folding. She waited. "I do not belong here," Clara said. "You did not belong in a linen closet either." Mrs. Greer's tone was dry as chalk. "But you made do. This is no different." Clara set the folded towel on the washstand. She picked up the cloth beside it and began again, edge to edge, corners aligned. "There is something else you should know." Mrs. Greer's voice shifted, not softer, but more deliberate, the way it got when she was choosing words with particular care. "Aldrich asked me twice this morning where you had gone. Before breakfast. Before the other servants were properly awake." Clara's hands stilled on the cloth. "He has never asked about a servant before." Mrs. Greer's eyes were steady. "Not once in the 3 years he has been in this house. Be careful what you say near him. Be careful what he sees." She left without waiting for a response. The door closed with a quiet, final click. Clara sat in the firelight, with the cloth in her hands, and the creature breathing beside her and the seal a permanent dark signature on her wrist, and she thought about Aldrich's footsteps in the corridor, unhurried, indifferent, and the way he had not seen her when he knocked her basket from her hands. He had not seen her then. He was looking for her now. She folded the cloth, set it down, folded it again. The afternoon came in slowly, the winter light pressing thin and gray through the curtain's edge. The creature slept. Clara sat in the chair by the fire and did not sleep and did not eat, and listened to the house breathe around her in its new and unfamiliar register. She heard the voices in the corridor before she could make out the words. Lord Vale's voice first, low, controlled, the particular flatness of a man who has decided not to be surprised. Then a woman's voice, and the sound of it moved through the door and through the wall and through the air of the room like something that had been sharpened specifically for that purpose. Silk over steel. I heard you have acquired something interesting, Edmund. A pause, perfectly timed. A familiar that answers to a servant girl. How quaint. Clara was on her feet before she knew she had moved. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her shoulder against the plaster, her breathing very shallow. Lady Marchmont. Lord Vale's voice was flat. You were not expected until spring. Plans change when rumors travel. The woman's voice carried the particular softness of someone who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. I would like to see this girl. No. One word. The shadows in the corridor darkened visibly. Clara could see it through the thin gap at the door's edge. The light simply withdrawing, pulling back from the space where he stood. Lady Isolde laughed. It was a sound like crystal tapping crystal, bright, precise, and entirely without warmth. How protective, Edmund. One might think the seal means something to you. Silence. The kind that had weight. The Vampire King's seal on a laundress. Her voice moved. She was walking, her footsteps light and deliberate. The last of the Hallowmere line, alive and working in your kitchens. And you found her before I did. I do wonder how long you intended to keep that particular secret. This conversation is finished, Isolde. For now. The footsteps receded, unhurried, indifferent. The footsteps of a woman who had never once in her life been truly turned away from anything. Do give the girl my regards. The corridor went quiet. The seal on Clara's wrist pulsed cold, sharp, insistent. A cold that went past skin and settled in the bone, the way the December air had found the cracks in her knuckles. Patient, inevitable. The creature was awake. It stood on the bed with its smoke body fully extended, its silver core blazing, its amber eyes fixed on the door, with an intensity that made the hair on Clara's arms rise. A low sound moved through it. Not a hiss, not a whimper. Something older than either. A sound of recognition, of warning. Clara pressed her palm flat over the seal. She did not move. She did not breathe. Lady Isolde's footsteps were gone. The corridor was silent, but the temperature outside her door had dropped. Not the gradual cooling of a room losing its fire. A sudden, deliberate drop. The cold of something very old and very still, standing just on the other side of the wood, making no sound, casting no shadow she could see. Waiting. The creature's eyes did not leave the door. The seal pulsed again beneath her palm, cold, then warm, then cold again, as though it could not decide which danger to name first. Clara stood with her back against the wall, her hand pressed over her wrist, and she did not open the door. Neither of them moved. The cold outside her door did not move for a long time. Clara stood with her palm pressed flat over the seal and her shoulder against the plaster, and her breathing as shallow as she could make it. The creature did not look away from the door. Its silver core pulsed in the dark. 1 beat. 2. Then the temperature shifted, not warming, but changing. The particular quality of the cold altering the way a held note changes when the breath behind it finally gives out. The presence withdrew. Clara did not move until the creature sat down. She found the East Wing library 3 hours later, following the creature, which moved through the servants' corridors as though it had always known the house. Perhaps it had. The thought arrived without drama and settled in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She did not examine it. She pushed open the library door and went inside. The books on the lower shelves were organized by house. She found Hallowmere between 2 volumes so old their spines had gone to dust at the edges. She pulled it free and carried it to the window seat, and read by the gray winter light until her eyes ached. The seal on her wrist pulsed warm, steady, patient. She was still reading when Mrs. Greer found her. The housekeeper took in the scene without expression. Clara on the window seat, the creature curled at her feet, the open book held in both hands, knuckles white against the binding. Mrs. Greer did not ask what she had found. She sat down in the chair nearest the window and folded her hands in her lap and waited. Clara's voice, when it came, was steady, the steadiness of someone who has not yet understood what they are saying. It says the Hallowmere were destroyed in 1672. Every member of the house. She did not look up from the page. But the familiar only bonds with blood descendants. Yes, Mrs. Greer said. That is not possible. Clara's hands tightened on the book. I was born in a workhouse. My mother died when I was 7. My father before that. Lord Vale sent word to the archives in London 3 days ago. Mrs. Greer's voice was the careful voice, the choosing words voice. The records came back this morning. A pause. Your mother's name before she entered the workhouse was Maren Hallowmere. Your father was Tobias Hallowmere. They were the last of the line. They hid you among humans to keep you alive. Clara's hands released the book. It fell. The sound it made against the floor was very loud in the quiet library. She did not pick it up. She looked at the seal on her wrist, the dark mark she had spent 3 years hiding under her sleeve. The mark she had assumed was a scar, a burn, a workhouse brand she could not remember receiving. You are not a laundress who found a creature in the snow, Clara. Mrs. Greer did not soften it. She had never been a woman who softened things. You are the last vampire of a royal house, and that creature came to find you because you are its rightful mistress. The creature lifted its head. Its amber eyes found Clara's face. Clara stared at the seal. The room was very quiet. The winter light pressed thin and gray through the glass, and she sat in it and felt the shape of 28 years rearrange itself around a fact she had no framework to hold. She did not fold anything. Her hands were not capable of it. She sat with the fallen book at her feet, and the creature watching her and Mrs. Greer's steady presence in the chair beside her. And she did not speak, and the seal pulsed on, warm and patient and entirely certain of what it was. The ball began at 8. Wyndmere Hall transformed itself in the hours between. Candles multiplied in the chandeliers until the great hall blazed. Greenery wound up the banisters. The Victorian aristocracy arrived in carriages and furs, and the particular confidence of people who had never once in their lives been required to be invisible. Clara stood at the edge of the hall in a gown Mrs. Greer had procured from somewhere she did not ask about. Dark blue wool, simply cut, nothing that would draw attention. It drew attention anyway. She could feel it. Every vampire in the room turned toward her by degrees, the way compass needles turn toward north, and she understood now what they were sensing. Not human, not turned. Something older than either. Something they had been told was extinct. She kept her hands in the folds of the gown. Lady Isolde arrived at 8:30. White silk, diamond combs. A smile that stopped precisely at the corners of her mouth. She moved through the hall as though she had already measured it for new furniture, touching the back of a chair here, adjusting a candelabra there, and the crowd parted for her the way crowds part for people who have never learned to expect otherwise. She came directly to Clara. So. Her voice was the softness of something that had never needed volume. You are the Hallowmere relic. I am Clara Fenwick. The words came out level. Clara did not know how. You are a name on a seal that belongs to a dead house. Lady Isolde's pearl-white gloves were immaculate. She had never touched anything unpleasant in her life. I have come to discuss its transfer. The temperature in the hall dropped. Lord Vale materialized at Clara's left side. No sound. No warning. The shadows at his feet spread across the marble floor like ink dropped in water, reaching toward Lady Isolde's white silk hem and stopping just short. His amber eyes had gone fully crimson. He did not look at Clara. He looked at Isolde, and his voice carried across the hall with the particular clarity of a man who intends to be heard. The seal is not transferable, Isolde. You know this. Every vampire in this room knows this. The hall went silent. 200 faces turned. She bears the mark of a sovereign house. He said it for the room, for the witnesses, for the record that would be made of this night. As Vampire King, I recognize her claim. The silence held. Clara's hands were shaking inside the folds of her gown. She pressed them against her thighs and felt the trembling move up through her arms and into her shoulders, and she clenched her jaw and stood very still and did not let any of it reach her face. Lady Isolde smiled. The door left ajar smile. How very formal, Edmund. She turned and walked away, unhurried, touching the back of another chair as she went. We shall speak again before the evening is out. Clara found the servants' corridor by instinct. Her feet knew the way her mind could not have managed. She pushed through the green baize door, and the noise of the ball cut off behind her, and she stood in the narrow passage with its stone floor and its smell of tallow and lye soap, and she breathed. Her legs would not hold her much further. The linen room was where it had always been. She pushed the door open and went inside and sat down on the floor in the blue wool gown and pulled a stack of towels from the lowest shelf. Her hands found the first one. She tried to fold it, edge to edge. The corners would not align. She unfolded it. Tried again. Her hands were shaking too badly. The towel came out crooked, worse than before, and she stared at it, and something in her chest cracked open along a seam she had not known was there. She pressed both palms flat against the stone floor. The cold of it. The particular cold of this floor, which she had knelt on for 3 years, which had held her together on every night she had nothing else to hold to. The sound that came out of her was not crying. It was older than crying. It came from somewhere below language, below thought, below the 28 years of being invisible and small and careful and sufficient unto herself. It came from the part of her that had spent 28 years not knowing what it was. The creature came from the shadows. It pressed its warm smoke body against her ribs. The silver light at its core pulsed once, twice, and the seal on Clara's wrist answered it. Not the dark pulse she knew, not the cold warning or the warm recognition. Silver. The light that came from her wrist was silver, filling the linen room, catching the white of the folded sheets and turning them luminous. She did not notice. Mrs. Greer was standing in the doorway. The housekeeper had followed without sound, without announcement, and she stood now in her black dress, with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the silver light filling the room, and at Clara on the floor, and at the creature pressed against her, and she said nothing. She sat down on the stone floor beside Clara in her housekeeper's black, which would crease and would need pressing, and which she did not appear to care about in the slightest. She put one hand on Clara's shoulder. She waited. The shouting reached them from the east wing. Mrs. Greer was on her feet first. Clara followed, her legs unsteady, the silver light at her wrist dimming but not gone. They moved through the servants' passage and out into the east wing corridor, and Clara stopped. Lord Vail had Aldrich pinned against the wall with one hand. Aldrich's feet were off the floor. His face was the color of old ash. The Vampire King's eyes were full crimson, no amber remaining, and the shadows at his feet had spread to fill the corridor from wall to wall. "Who sent you?" Not a question. "Lady Marchmont." Aldrich's voice was a thread. "She wants the familiar. She says if the Hallowmere seal can be broken, the power transfers to whoever holds the creature when it happens." Lord Vail dropped him. Aldrich hit the floor and did not get up. Lord Vail turned. His crimson gaze found Clara's wrist, found the silver light still leaking from the seal, and something moved through his expression that was not surprise. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has been waiting for the confirmation he already knew was coming. "The seal is not broken by taking the familiar, Isolde." He said it to the end of the corridor, to the dark at the end of the corridor where the candles had gone out. "It is broken by killing the bearer." The words arrived in Clara's chest like a stone through glass. Lady Isolde's voice came from the dark, calm, clear, entirely without hurry. "Then I suppose we understand each other perfectly, Edmund." Her footsteps moved away. Unhurried. The footsteps of a woman who had never once been truly turned away from anything. They faded into the dark of the east wing, and then there was silence. And the silence was worse than the footsteps. Clara stood in the corridor with silver light leaking from her wrist, and the creature pressed hard against her ankle, and Mrs. Greer's hand locked around her arm, and the Vampire King's crimson gaze fixed on her face. From somewhere deep beneath the house, a door slammed open. The tea sat untouched on Lord Vail's desk. 3 cups. Mrs. Greer had brought them anyway, arranged them with the same precision she applied to everything, and then stood with her hands folded at her waist and waited. Lord Vail did not sit. He stood at the window with his back to the room, and the darkness beyond the glass was absolute. "She will return before dawn," he said. "The Ashburn Covenant moves in numbers, 12 perhaps more, old ones. They will breach the east wing first because Aldrich told her the locks there are weakest." He turned. His eyes had settled back to amber, but only just. "I can hold them, but not while keeping you from her reach simultaneously." Clara looked at Mrs. Greer. The housekeeper's expression gave nothing away, which was its own kind of answer. She looked down at the creature in her lap. It had curled there the moment she sat, its smoke body warm and solid in a way that still surprised her, its silver core pulsing in slow, even rhythm against her thighs. She looked at her own hands, cracked along the knuckles, red at the joints, trembling, still, from the corridor. "I am not going to make you choose," she said. Mrs. Greer made a sound. "Clara, do not be heroic. It does not suit laundresses." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "It does not suit housekeepers either, Nell, and yet here you are, on the floor of the linen room, in your good black dress." Mrs. Greer looked away. Her jaw moved once. Her eyes had gone very bright. Lord Vale watched the exchange. He said nothing. The shadows at his feet went perfectly, completely still. He gave them an hour. Mrs. Greer used it to move through the servants' quarters with quiet efficiency, waking each member of the household staff with a hand on the shoulder and a single sentence. No alarm, no raised voice. Clara heard the soft shuffle of feet through the walls. The servants' tunnel ran beneath the east garden. She had never known it existed. Mrs. Greer had known for 14 years. When the housekeeper was gone, Clara was alone with Lord Vale in the great hall. The creature sat on the floor between them. Its amber eyes moved from one face to the other with the patience of something that had been waiting for 2 centuries and had learned not to rush. Clara's voice broke on the first word. She did not repair it. "I have spent my entire life making myself invisible so that no one would have a reason to send me away." She kept her gaze on the far wall, the dark paneling, the portraits of people she did not know. "I folded their linens. I walked close to walls. I took up no space. I made no sound that was not useful." The burning behind her eyes was becoming something she could not manage. "And now you are telling me that the only way to survive is to become the most visible thing in this house." She turned toward the window. The glass was black. She could see herself in it. The blue wool gown, the seal soul glowing faintly at her wrist, her own face unfamiliar. He did not move toward her, did not touch her. His voice dropped to a register she had never heard from him, something below the formal distance he wore like armor. "I have been visible for 400 years, Clara." A pause. "It is not the seeing that matters. It is who sees you." She turned back. She did not wipe her face. The tears were there and she let them be there, because she was done with the work of hiding every small human thing about herself. The seal blazed silver. He looked at it, then at her face. The amber of his eyes was very steady. "I see you." 2 words. The creature's light surged upward, filling the space between them, and for one moment the great hall of Wyndmere was nothing but silver and silence and the sound of her own breathing. The east wing door came off its hinges at 4:30. Clara heard it. Not a crash, but a pressure. A sudden absence of sound that was worse than any noise. The candles along the corridor guttered and went dark in sequence, one after another, moving toward them like a tide going out. Lord Vale was already moving. The shadows erupted from him, not the careful, controlled thing she had seen before, but something vast and unrestrained, 400 years of power with nothing held back. He met the first wave in the corridor beyond the great hall, and the sound that followed was not human, and she did not look at it directly. 12 against 1 was 12 against 1. Clara stood in the center of the great hall. She was not pressed against a wall. She was not folding anything. She was not making herself small or quiet or useful in the particular invisible way she had perfected over 28 years of survival. The creature stood at her feet. Its silver light was blazing, brighter than she had ever seen it, bright enough to cast shadows of its own. Lady Isolde walked through the chaos as though it were a garden party she had grown bored of attending. Her white gloves were immaculate. Her expression was the same patient, elegant contempt it had been in the corridor, in the ballroom. In every moment she had looked at Clara and seen something beneath her notice. She stopped 10 paces away. "Give me the familiar and the seal, girl." Her voice was perfectly level. "You are a laundress playing at power. This does not end well for laundresses." Clara felt the seal pull at her wrist. Not the dark, warning pulse, not the cold recognition. Something older. Something that had been waiting beneath every folded sheet and every cracked knuckle and every night she had slept in a linen closet and told herself it was enough. "I was a laundress," Clara said. "I was also a Hallowmere, and I did not know it." She held Lady Isolde's gaze. "But I know it now." She stopped suppressing it. It was not a decision, exactly. It was more like setting down something she had been carrying so long she had forgotten she was carrying it. The constant, exhausting work of being less loud, less present, less real. She simply stopped. And what had been building beneath that effort for 28 years came up through the seal and through her hands and through the creature at her feet in a single, silent wave. Silver. Not a weapon. Not a strike. A flood. The way dawn comes. The way a tide returns. The way a thing that has always been true becomes finally, undeniably visible. It swept through the great hall from wall to wall and floor to ceiling. Every vampire of the Ashburn Covenant dropped to their knees. Not harmed. Held. Pinned in the light like insects in amber, their dark artifacts cracking along their surfaces and going cold and dead. Lady Isolde's composure lasted 3 seconds longer than the rest. Then her knees met the floor, and her white gloves finally, irrevocably, were ruined. The candles flared once and died. The great hall filled with nothing but silver radiance and absolute silence. Lord Vale stood in the light. His crimson eyes were shifting. The red bleeding out, the amber returning, slow and steady. He was looking at her. Not at the seal, not at the creature, at her face. The expression he wore was not surprise. It was the recognition of a man who has been waiting for a very long time to see something he already knew was coming. Dawn arrived through the shattered east windows in long, pale strips. The Ashburn Covenant remained on their knees as the guards came, Lord Vale's people, moving with quiet efficiency through the ruined hall. Lady Isolde did not speak. She knelt in the fading silver light, with her dark artifacts dead at her wrists, and her white gloves destroyed, and she looked at Clara with an expression that had finally, completely, shed its contempt. What remained was something far more unsettling: understanding. The servants' tunnel door opened. Mrs. Greer emerged, the vault key still in her hand, and she looked at the kneeling vampires, and the silver light still fading from Clara's hands, and the creature riding on Clara's shoulder, with its light burning steady and warm. She said, "Well, I suppose you will not be folding linens anymore." Clara laughed. It came out of her fully formed, unguarded, the first real laugh she had produced in longer than she could account for. "I might," she said. "I was good at it." Mrs. Greer's mouth curved. She looked away before it became a smile, but not quite fast enough. Lord Vale turned to the assembled guards. His voice carried the full weight of 400 years without effort. "This is Clara Hallowmere. She is under the protection of this house and this crown. Any hand raised against her answers to me." Clara heard her name in his mouth. Her real name. The name she had not known was hers until tonight. They walked through the East Wing corridor, Mrs. Greer on her left, Lord Vale's shadows trailing behind them both like a second cloak. The creature rode on Clara's shoulder, its light steady, its amber eyes half closed in something that looked very much like satisfaction. Clara passed the place in the corridor where Aldrich had shouldered past her without looking. 3 years of mornings when she had pressed herself flat against the wall to let others through. She did not press against anything now. She walked in the center of the passage, and the passage was wide enough. She passed the linen closet. The door was slightly ajar, the way she had left it. She did